In the untamed wilderness of 1870s Montana territory, a tale of unprecedented love unfolds that would challenge the very foundations of two worlds. Cast out by her own people, a young woman faces certain death in the merciless frontier, her fate seemingly sealed by betrayal and nature's cruel hand. But destiny has other plans. When a powerful Crow chief discovers her at death's door, he makes a decision that defies generations of tribal tradition and settler prejudice alike. Against all odds, he not only saves her life, but elevates her to a position no white woman has ever held, as his queen and equal. Their love story becomes legend, but shadows lurk in every corner of their newfound paradise. What dark secrets from their pasts threaten to tear apart this fragile bridge between two worlds? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silver locket caught the last rays of Boston's autumn sunlight, its polished surface reflecting Sarah Winchester's tear-stained face as she closed it with trembling fingers. Inside, a miniature portrait of her family, painted in happier times, seemed to mock her present circumstances. The daughter of Judge Edward Winchester, one of Boston's most respected magistrates, now stood alone in her chambers, the sounds of angry voices echoing through the halls of their Beacon Hill mansion. "The evidence is irrefutable, Edward." Senator Harrison's voice boomed from below. "Your daughter has been corresponding with Confederate sympathizers. The letters bear her signature, her seal." Sarah's fingers tightened around the locket. The letters, forged with devastating precision, had appeared on her father's desk 3 days ago. Each page detailed supposed plans to undermine the Reconstruction. Efforts, schemes that would have reignited the wounds of a barely healed nation. The craftsmanship of the forgery was exquisite. Even she had gasped at the perfect imitation of her handwriting. "My daughter is no traitor," her father's voice cracked with emotion. But Sarah could hear the doubt creeping in, planted by weeks of careful manipulation by those she had once considered friends. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 6, its deep resonance marking the end of life as she knew it. Sarah moved to her window, watching as carriages arrived bearing the members of the emergency tribunal, the same people who had danced at her coming-out ball 2 seasons ago now arrived to pass judgment on her supposed crimes. Her lady's maid, Mary, slipped into the room. "Miss Sarah, they're asking for you downstairs." The girl's eyes were red-rimmed. "Mr. Theodore is here." Theodore. The name sent a fresh wave of pain through Sarah's chest. Her fiancé, or former fiancé after today, stood among her accusers. His political ambitions had proven stronger than their 3 years of courtship, their whispered promises of a future together. It was his testimony that had given weight to the forged letters, his reluctant confirmation of her suspicious absences and mysterious correspondences. The great room fell silent as Sarah descended the stairs, her navy silk gown rustling against the polished wood. Faces turned toward her, some hostile, some pitying, none friendly. The informal tribunal had arranged themselves around her father's mahogany desk, with Senator Harrison at its center. Theodore stood by the fireplace, his handsome face arranged in an expression of grave concern that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. "Miss Winchester," Senator Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of predetermined judgment, "you stand accused of seditious correspondence and activities against the United States government. The evidence presented is substantial. Do you wish to speak in your defense?" Sarah lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "The letters are forgeries. I am innocent of these charges. Yet your own fiancé testifies to your suspicious movements, your unexplained absences," Harrison pressed. "Mr. Carlton, would you care to elaborate?" Theodore stepped forward, and Sarah saw the ambition burning behind his rehearsed remorse. "Sarah has been distant these past months. Secret meetings, letters hidden away. I tried to ignore it, to trust in her loyalty. But when I discovered her corresponding with known Confederate sympathizers," he paused for effect, As much as it pains me, I cannot in good conscience remain silent. The betrayal, though expected, still cut deep. Sarah's gaze met Theodore's, and in that moment she understood the true price of ambition. Her father's position as judge had been waning, while Senator Harrison's star rose in Washington. Theodore had simply chosen the stronger alliance. The verdict, when it came, surprised no one. Exile to the Western Territories or imprisonment for treason. A mercy, they called it, offered out of respect for her father's position and her own. Youth. Sarah chose exile, knowing that a cell would mean a slow death of the spirit. They gave her 24 hours to pack and leave Boston. Her father, broken by the evidence and Theodore's testimony, could not meet her eyes as she was escorted to her rooms. Only Mary helped her pack, sliding a purse of saved coins into Sarah's traveling bag, along with provisions for the journey. That night, as Sarah prepared for her departure, she stood before her mirror one last time. The young woman who stared back bore little resemblance to the carefree debutante of 2 seasons past. Her honey-blonde hair was simply arranged, her green eyes shadowed with new wisdom. She removed the silver locket, her mother's last gift, before consumption took her, and fastened it around her neck. Whatever lay ahead in the Western Territories, she would face it carrying this piece of home. Dawn broke cold and grey over Boston Harbor as Sarah boarded the steamer that would begin her journey west. She stood at the rail, watching her world recede into the morning mist. The silver locket rested against her heart, its weight a reminder of all she had lost and all she must become. As the ship's horn sounded and the journey began, Sarah whispered a promise to the wind. She would not merely survive this exile, she would uncover the truth behind her betrayal. But first, she had to learn to navigate a world far removed from the polished floors of Beacon Hill, a world where her refined manners and social graces would mean nothing against the raw challenges of survival. The Massachusetts coast faded from view, and with it, Sarah Winchester, daughter of Judge Edward Winchester, belle of Boston society and alleged traitor, ceased to exist. In her place stood a woman facing an uncertain future in the untamed Western Territories, where she would either forge a new destiny or perish in the attempt. The torn map fluttered in Sarah's trembling hands, its wrinkled surface bearing little resemblance to the actual Montana Territory sprawling before her. 2 months of hard travel had brought her to this moment, standing at the edge of civilization, where the last stagecoach line ended and the true wilderness began. Behind her, the rough-hewn trading post of Fort Benton squatted against the vast prairie like humanity's final defiant gesture. "Last chance to reconsider, miss," the gruff shopkeeper warned as he secured supplies to her newly purchased horse. "Ain't natural for a lady to ride out alone, especially not with Crow territory just north and Blackfeet roaming these parts." Sarah tucked the map into her saddlebag, adjusting her split riding skirt, the last concession to propriety she could afford out here. The fine clothes she'd brought from Boston had long since been traded for more practical gear, though she'd kept one silk dress wrapped carefully at the bottom of her pack, along with her mother's locket, some fragments of her past she couldn't bear to part with. "I appreciate your concern," she replied, her Boston accent already softening after weeks on the frontier, "but I've no choice in the matter." The truth of those words settled heavy in her chest. She had spent her railway passes and stagecoach money, sold her jewelry, saved the locket, and now possessed only this horse, these supplies, and her determination to forge a new life far from the shadows of her past. The Montana spring brought treacherous weather. Dark clouds gathered over the distant mountains as Sarah urged her horse northward, following what she hoped was the route to one of the new homesteading territories. The map, purchased from a questionable source in Fort Benton, showed settlements that the shopkeeper had warned might not exist anymore, if they ever had. By the 3rd day, the rain began. It fell in sheets that turned the prairie into a sea of mud, each hoofstep becoming a struggle. Sarah's waterproofed coat, another fort, purchase, proved less resistant than advertised. Water trickled down her neck, soaked through her clothes, and settled into her bones with a chill that no amount of movement could shake. On the 5th day, she lost the trail. The rain had washed away any trace of prior passage and the landmarks. On her map, crude sketches of rock formations and rivers seemed to mock her with their vagueness. She led her horse through a maze of coulees, each one looking identical to the last, the overcast sky offering no hint of direction. "We'll find our way," she murmured to the horse, as much to hear a human voice as to reassure the animal. The mare's ears flicked back at her words, but its steps grew increasingly uncertain in the treacherous terrain. The accident happened so quickly, Sarah had no time to cry out. One moment they were picking their way along what seemed a solid path. The next, the ground crumbled beneath the horse's hooves. Sarah felt herself thrown forward as the mare lost its footing on the rain-slicked earth. They tumbled down the embankment toward the swollen creek below. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Sarah surfaced, gasping, the cold water a shock to her system. Her horse thrashed nearby, whinnying in panic as the current swept them both downstream. Sarah managed to grab a low-hanging branch, but could only watch in horror as her mount, still tangled in its gear, was carried around the bend. "No!" The cry tore from her throat, echoing off the canyon walls. With it went her supplies, her weapons, most of her food, everything she needed for survival. It took the last of her strength to pull herself onto the bank. She lay there, shivering violently as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. The sun, breaking through the clouds for the first time in days, offered little warmth. Sarah forced herself to move, to take inventory of what remained. The clothes on her back, a small knife in her boot, and miraculously, her mother's locket still around her neck. The next days became a blur of constant movement. Sarah knew that to stop was to die. She followed the creek, hoping it would lead to some settlement or camp. Her feet, encased in sodden boots, developed blisters that broke and bled. Hunger became a constant companion, dulled only by the few berries she recognized as safe from her father's botanical books. At night, she huddled in whatever shelter she could find. Shallow caves, the lee of large rocks, once even the hollow of a dead tree. The spring nights dipped to near freezing, and she fought to stay awake, knowing that to sleep too deeply in such cold was dangerous. During these long hours, she found herself talking to ghosts, her mother, her father, even Theodore. The conversations always ended the same way, with the bitter taste of betrayal and the knowledge that she was utterly alone. A week after losing her horse, Sarah stumbled upon the remains of a homestead. The cabin had long since collapsed, its timbers rotting into the earth. But in the root cellar, she found a jar of preserved peaches, the seal miraculously intact. She wept as she ate them, the sweet taste a reminder of summer parties in Boston that now seemed a lifetime away. The map, when she finally pulled it from her pocket, was a sodden mass of disintegrating paper. Sarah smoothed it on a flat rock, trying to salvage some information from the running ink. As it dried in the wan sunlight, she realized with growing horror that she had been walking in the wrong direction for days. The settlements she sought lay far to the east, while she had been pushing steadily northwest, deeper into untamed territory. That night, as she huddled against a boulder and watched the stars wheel overhead, Sarah Winchester finally understood the true meaning of solitude. In Boston, she had thought herself alone after her accusers pronounced their verdict, but that had been a different kind of isolation. Social, manufactured, survivable. This solitude was absolute. Out here, the vastness of the Montana Territory stretched endlessly in every direction, indifferent to her presence, her past, or her uncertain future. As consciousness began to fade, the silver locket pressing against her collarbone seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, a reminder of all she had lost and all she still might lose. The wilderness had stripped away every pretense, every social grace, every certainty she had ever known. In their place, it offered only one truth: survive or surrender to the vast emptiness that had swallowed more hopeful souls than hers. The empty water canteen made a hollow sound as it fell from Sarah's nerveless fingers. She stared at it, uncomprehending, as if willpower alone might refill its parched interior. 3 days had passed since she'd found the last creek, and now the Montana sun beat down with merciless intensity, transforming the early spring warmth into an unseasonable, scorching heat. Her cracked lips formed words, but no sound emerged. The refined pronunciation her mother had drilled into her through countless social lessons now meant nothing, her tongue too swollen to shape even the simplest syllables. She clutched at her mother's locket, its silver surface hot against her palm, and tried to remember the taste of water. The landscape before her shimmered, reality bending in the heat. Was that a stand of cottonwoods in the distance, or another cruel mirage? Yesterday, or was it the day before? She had stumbled toward what looked like a settlement, only to find sun-bleached buffalo bones arranged by some trick of perspective. One foot, then the other, she whispered to herself, her voice rough as sandpaper. The Boston accent was completely gone now, stripped away along with her fine manners and social graces. What remained was something more primitive, the raw will to survive. The sun climbed higher, and with it came the visions. They started as they always did, with Theodore standing in her father's study, his handsome face arranged in that mask of false concern. But the heat and thirst twisted the memory, morphing it into something darker. In this version he smiled as he condemned her, his teeth sharp as a wolf's, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You never belonged among us," Dream Theodore sneered, his voice carrying across the years and miles. "Look at you now, the proud Miss Winchester, crawling in the dirt like a savage." Sarah stumbled, her knees striking hard ground. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through her undernourished body, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she was still alive, still fighting. The alternative was to surrender to the growing darkness at the edges of her vision, to lie down in the sparse shade of a sagebrush and let the Montana territory claim another lost soul. As she pushed herself up, her mother's voice drifted through her mind, clear as a church bell on Sunday morning. "Persistence, my dear. It's not enough to be beautiful or accomplished. A Winchester persists." The memory was so vivid, she could smell her mother's lavender water, could feel the cool touch of her hand adjusting the locket around young Sarah's neck. "I'm trying, Mother," she mumbled, forcing her legs to move. "God help me, I'm trying." The sun reached its zenith, and the visions grew stronger. Now she saw her father standing before the tribunal, his proud shoulders bowed under the weight of manufactured evidence. The scene shifted, and she was back in the Fort Benton trading post, the shopkeeper's warnings echoing, "Ain't natural for a lady to ride out alone." A bitter laugh escaped her cracked lips. Lady, that word belonged to another life, another Sarah Winchester. That Sarah had died somewhere between Boston Harbor and this merciless wilderness. The woman who remained was something else, a creature of dust and desperation, of raw instinct and stubborn will. The locket seemed to grow heavier with each step, as if it contained not just her family's portrait, but the weight of every choice, every mistake that had led her here. She thought of opening it one last time, of looking upon those beloved faces before the end. But her fingers, swollen and clumsy, couldn't manage the clasp. The horizon tilted suddenly, the ground rising to meet her with unexpected speed. Sarah felt herself falling, but couldn't summon the strength to break her descent. Her cheek pressed against sun-baked earth, and for a moment she imagined she could hear hoofbeats in the distance, another hallucination surely, like the cottonwoods and the settlement. But the sound grew stronger, accompanied by voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Sarah tried to lift her head, to focus her dust-clouded eyes on the approaching figures. Through the haze of dehydration and exhaustion, she made out the shapes of mounted warriors, their faces painted for hunting, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of prairie dust. Crow hunters, she realized with the last spark of lucidity in her fevered mind. The shopkeeper's warnings about tribal territories came back to her, but she was beyond fear now. Death by arrow or bullet would be quicker than the slow agony of thirst, and exposure. The warriors drew closer, their voices carrying across the diminishing distance. Sarah could see them more clearly now. Proud men astride paint horses, their long hair adorned with eagle feathers, their bodies adorned with symbols of power and status. They were everything the Boston papers had painted as savage and frightening, yet in her delirium, they seemed to shimmer with an almost supernatural beauty. One rider separated himself from the group, his horse stepping carefully forward. Even through her failing vision, Sarah could tell this man was different, his bearing more regal, his regalia more elaborate. He spoke, his deep voice carrying authority even in words she couldn't understand. Sarah tried to respond, to explain herself, to ask for mercy or a swift end, but her parched throat produced only a weak rattle, and the darkness that had been. Threatening finally rushed in. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was the chief dismounting, his movement graceful as a hunting cat's, his shadow falling across her like a blanket. As she slipped into oblivion, Sarah Winchester, once the pride of Boston society, now a half-dead wanderer in the Montana Territory, felt the silver locket pulse once more against her skin. In that final moment of awareness, she thought she heard her mother's voice again, no longer speaking of persistence, but of destiny. Then even that faded, leaving only the sound of prairie wind and strange voices calling her toward an unknown future. Black Wolf dismounted in one fluid motion, the sacred medicine bundle at his waist swaying gently with the movement. 20. Summers of leadership had taught him to read signs in the smallest details: a broken twig, a disturbed stone, the flight pattern of ravens. But this sign was as clear as a signal fire against a night sky. A white woman, alone and dying on Crow land. "Great Chief!" Rising Thunder, his most trusted warrior, spoke in their native tongue. "She is of the white man's world. Our laws are clear about outsiders who trespass." Black Wolf knelt beside the unconscious woman, noting the quality of her clothing beneath the trail dirt, the delicate craftsmanship of the silver locket at her throat. This was no settler's wife or trader's woman. Her hands, though blistered now, showed signs of a genteel past. "Look how she clutches her medicine," he replied, gesturing to the locket. "Even in surrender she holds to her spirit." He reached for the medicine bundle at his waist, a sacred object passed down through generations of Crow chiefs, its contents known only to those who carried its burden of power and responsibility. Rising Thunder shifted uncomfortably atop his horse. "The Council of Elders will not understand bringing her to our camp. Already there is talk that you keep too many of the old ways when the world is changing. This would give your opponents more cause to question your leadership." The weight of the medicine bundle seemed to increase as Black Wolf considered his warrior's words. Since becoming chief, he had walked a careful line between tradition and necessity. The world beyond their territories was transforming rapidly. Steam engines cut iron paths across the prairie, and the buffalo herds grew smaller each season. Some chiefs chose to fight these changes with arrows and rifles. Black Wolf had chosen a different path: adaptation without surrender, change without loss of identity. He studied the woman's face, marked by exposure but still bearing traces of refined beauty. Her breaths came shallow and quick, like a wounded deer's. Without help, she would not survive another day under the Montana sun. "Tell me, Rising Thunder," Black Wolf said, his voice carrying the depth of authority that had made him chief at such a young age. "When the Great Spirit places a sign in our path, do we question its meaning, or do we seek to understand its purpose?" The medicine bundle stirred in a sudden breeze, its leather wrappings brushing against Black Wolf's chest like a whisper from the ancestors. He untied its intricate knots, a ritual usually performed only in the sacred lodge, and spread the bundle open upon the ground. Inside lay objects of power gathered through generations: an eagle's primary feather from his grandfather's time, a perfect circle of white shell from the great waters far to the west, a small copper bowl hammered from sky metal, and herbs known only to the medicine people. But it was the smallest item that drew his attention. a braided lock of hair, black shot through with silver, that had belonged to his mother. She had been born to the Blackfeet, given to the Crow in a peace treaty that lasted less than a season. Yet she had risen to become one of the most respected women in the tribe, her wisdom sought by chiefs and warriors alike. She had taught Black Wolf that strength could wear many faces, that leadership meant seeing beyond the surface of things to the truth beneath. "The white man's world presses against our borders," Black Wolf said, rewrapping the medicine bundle. With practiced care, they send their soldiers, their treaties, their agents who speak with forked tongues, but they have never sent us one of their own like this, stripped of everything but the will to live. He gestured to two young warriors. "Bring the travois, we will take her to the camp." "And when she wakes?" Rising Thunder asked. "What then?" Black Wolf mounted his horse in a single motion, the medicine bundle secure at his waist once more. "Then we will learn why the Great Spirit has placed her in our path." The journey back to camp was conducted in silence, broken only by the woman's occasional delirious murmurs. Black Wolf rode beside the travois, watching her fight for each breath. There was a strength in her that reminded him of his mother, not the obvious strength of a warrior, but something deeper, more enduring. As they approached the camp, smoke from cooking fires rising like prayers into the evening sky, Black Wolf felt the weight of his decisions settle more firmly upon his shoulders. The woman's presence would challenge more than just tribal customs. It would test the very foundations of his leadership, his vision for the Crow's future. Children ran out to meet the returning hunting party, their excited chatter falling silent. At the sight of the unconscious white woman, women paused in their work, men gathered in small groups, and all eyes turned to their chief for explanation. Black Wolf raised his hand for silence, his voice carrying across the suddenly still camp. "The Great Spirit has sent us a sign. How we read this sign will determine our path forward. Bring White Shell Woman to tend her." White Shell Woman, the tribe's most skilled healer, emerged from her lodge. Her ancient eyes took in the scene, the unconscious woman, the chief's hand resting near his medicine bundle, the watching tribe, and understood the complexity of the moment. "Some will say this breaks tribal law," she said in their language, her voice carrying the weight of decades of wisdom. "Some laws must bend, or they will break," Black Wolf replied. "My mother taught me this." White Shell Woman nodded slowly. "Your mother was wise, but wisdom is not always understood by those who prefer the comfort of old ways." As the healer directed the warriors to carry Sarah into her lodge, Black Wolf felt the medicine bundle stir once more. His mother's voice seemed to whisper from its depths, reminding him of her favorite teaching. Sometimes the greatest medicine comes in forms we do not expect. The wise chief learns to recognize it, no matter its shape. Looking at the woman's face, peaceful now in unconsciousness, Black Wolf knew his decision would alter the future of his people, for good or ill remained to be seen. But the medicine bundle sat warm against his side, and in its sacred contents he felt the approval of his ancestors. The sun set behind the western mountains, painting the sky in colors no white man's art could capture. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own decisions. For now, Black Wolf had chosen his path, guided by the wisdom of his mother and the mysterious workings of the Great Spirit who had placed this strange medicine in his path. Sarah returned to consciousness slowly, awareness seeping back like dawn light through morning mist. The first thing she noticed was the absence of sun on her face. Instead, cool shadows played across her closed eyelids. Then came the scents: wood smoke, dried herbs, leather, and something sweet she couldn't identify. A soft murmuring in an unfamiliar language drifted around her, punctuated by the gentle clinking of what sounded like bone against stone. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself lying on soft furs inside a large lodge. An elderly woman sat cross-legged nearby, grinding something in a stone mortar. The woman's face was deeply lined, her silver hair bound in two long braids, and around her neck hung an intricately beaded medicine wheel that caught the dim light filtering through the smoke hole above. "You wake at last," the the woman said in careful accented English. "I am White Shell Woman. You have been in the spirit world for 3 days." Sarah's hand instinctively went to her throat, relaxing only when she felt the familiar shape of her mother's locket. Her voice, when she found it, was barely a whisper. "The hunters. I remember horses. Black Wolf brought you to us." White Shell Woman nodded, setting aside her mortar. "Our chief saw something in you worth saving, though many questioned his wisdom." The healer helped Sarah sit up slowly, supporting her with surprising strength. A brass cup of cool water appeared in her hands. Small sips. White Shell Woman instructed, "Your body must remember how to accept such gifts." As Sarah drank, the lodge's entrance flap moved aside, allowing brief sunlight and a tall figure to enter. Even without the elaborate regalia she hazily remembered from her rescue, the man's bearing marked him as the chief. Black Wolf, White Shell Woman had called him. He spoke first in his own language, then in English that, while accented, was far more fluent than the healer's. "You have strength to survive alone in the Badlands. Few of any people could do this." Sarah lowered the cup, acutely aware of her disheveled state before this regal figure. Every lesson in proper Boston etiquette seemed inadequate for this moment. "I owe you my life," she managed, "though I don't understand why you chose to save me." Black Wolf's dark eyes studied her with an intensity that would have been discomforting in her previous life. Here, it seemed natural, vital even, as if he were reading not just her words, but the story written in her very being. "The Great Spirit places signs in our path," he said finally. "The wise leader learns to read them." His hand touched a decorated bundle at his waist. "You are far from your people. This was not by choice." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "No, I was forced to leave." The words caught in her throat, memories of Theodore's betrayal still sharp, despite all that had happened since. Something flickered in Black Wolf's expression, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a shared knowledge of exile's bitter taste. He spoke again to White Shell Woman, who nodded and began gathering herbs into a small pouch. "You will stay until you are strong," he said to Sarah. It was neither a request nor a command, but a simple statement of fact. "Then we will speak more of paths taken and paths yet to come." He turned to leave, then paused. "My people call this season the moon of new grass. It is a time of beginnings." With that, he was gone, leaving Sarah to ponder the layers of meaning in his words. White Shell Woman pressed the herb pouch into Sarah's hands. "Rest now. Tomorrow will bring its own medicine." As Sarah drifted back to sleep, her mother's locket resting against her collarbone, she realized that for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt something she had thought lost forever. Hope, fragile as new grass, pushing through spring. Soil, but hope nonetheless. The ceremonial dress lay across Sarah's sleeping furs, its intricate beadwork catching the morning light that filtered through the lodge's smoke hole. White Shell Woman had presented it to her at dawn, explaining that she could no longer wear her tattered Boston clothing if she wished to truly learn their ways. "Each bead tells a story," the elder woman explained, running weathered fingers over the geometric patterns. Sky, earth, running water, standing stones, all things connected, all things speaking to those who learn to listen. Sarah touched the soft tanned deerskin reverently. In the months since her rescue, she had begun to see the world through different eyes. The sophisticated patterns of Boston society had been replaced by deeper rhythms, the movement of sun and stars, the migration of buffalo, the sacred dances that marked each phase of the moon. "There is to be a ceremony tonight," White Shell Woman continued. "Black Wolf thinks it is time for you to participate, not just observe." The mention of the chief's name brought a flutter to Sarah's chest that she wasn't quite ready to examine. Over the past weeks, he had spent time each evening teaching her the Crow language, his patience matching her determination to learn. Their conversations had gradually expanded beyond simple phrases to encompass philosophy, tribal lore, and carefully measured personal revelations. "Will the elders accept my presence?" Sarah asked, knowing that some in the tribe still viewed her with suspicion. Rising Thunder, in particular, watched her with wary eyes, though he had begun to nod in greeting when their paths crossed. White Shell Woman's smile held the wisdom of decades. "They will accept what Black Wolf has already seen, that you carry your own medicine, different from ours, but no less powerful." As Sarah donned the ceremonial dress, she caught her reflection in a polished brass mirror, another remnant of trade with white settlers. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the Boston debutante of a year ago. Her skin had bronzed from days spent learning to tan hides and gather plants with the other women. Her once delicate hands had grown strong and sure. Even her way of moving had changed, becoming more deliberate, more connected to the earth beneath her feet. Only her mother's locket remained unchanged, though now it lay against the beaded yoke of a crow woman's dress. Sarah had begun to see it not just as a link to her past, but as her own kind of medicine bundle, carrying the strength of those who had come before. That evening, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of amber and rose, the tribe gathered for the ceremony. Drums began their heartbeat rhythm as Sarah took her place in the circle. Black Wolf sat opposite her, his face painted with sacred symbols, the firelight dancing across his noble features. He began to speak in their language, and Sarah felt a surge of pride as she understood most of his words. He spoke of change and continuation, of how the river remains itself, even as it transforms the stones it passes over. His eyes met hers across the fire, and in that moment something shifted in the space between them. The ceremony continued deep into the night. Sarah watched as young warriors demonstrated their skills, as children received their first blessings, as elders shared stories that reached back to the tribe's beginnings. When it was her turn to participate in the ritual sharing of the pipe, she felt the weight of tradition in her hands and the acceptance of the tribe washing over her like a warm rain. Later, as the fires burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, Black Wolf approached her. "You wear our ways well," he said softly in English, then switched to his native tongue, knowing she would understand. "The dress speaks true stories of who you are becoming." Sarah responded in careful Crow, her heart swelling as his eyes brightened at her proper use of the sacred forms. "I am learning that some paths, though hard, lead us to where we were always meant to be." He nodded, touching the medicine bundle at his waist. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will show you how we read the morning stars. There are stories there that belong to all peoples." As Sarah returned to her lodge that night, the ceremonial dress moving softly against her skin, she realized that she had stopped thinking of leaving, of finding some white settlement to start anew. Instead, she'd begun to think of mornings yet to come, of stars yet to be read, of stories yet to be shared with a man whose wisdom was slowly reshaping her understanding of everything she had once thought she knew. The warrior's lance stood upright in the center of the council lodge, its eagle feathers trembling in the tense air. Running Wolf, a young warrior from the northern band, had just delivered news that turned the autumn morning bitter. Lakota war parties had been spotted moving into traditional crow hunting grounds, and rumors spread of U.S. Army columns pushing westward into the territory. "They come from both sides now," Running Wolf concluded, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The Bluecoats speak of peace while taking our land. The Lakota speak of alliance while stealing our hunting grounds." Sarah sat quietly near White Shell Woman, her presence in the council now accepted, if not yet wholly embraced. 2 months of living among the Crow had taught her to read the currents of power that flowed through such gatherings. She watched Black Wolf, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders as he listened to the reports. Rising Thunder spoke next, his hand resting significantly on his weapon. "Perhaps now is the time to show our strength. The Lakota respect only the lance, and the white man's government understands only force." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled warriors. Sarah felt their frustration. Caught between expanding American settlements and aggressive tribal neighbors, the Crows' territory shrank with each passing season. Yet she had also learned enough of their ways to know that such decisions were never made in haste. Black Wolf rose, and the lodge fell silent. He walked to the lance, touching its shaft lightly. "My grandfather carried this lance in the time of our greatest victories," he began, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the lodge. "But he taught that the strongest weapon is a wise heart." He turned to face the council. "We must be like the river that finds its way around the mountain, not the lightning that strikes, but once and is gone." "And what of the white woman?" someone called from the back. "Since her arrival, our troubles have multiplied. Perhaps the spirits show their disapproval." Sarah felt the weight of eyes upon her, but kept her gaze steady. Black Wolf had taught her that in such moments, dignity mattered more than defense. To her surprise, it was Rising Thunder who spoke in her favor. "I have watched her," he said grudgingly. "She learns our ways with respect, not like the missionaries who would change us, and she knows the white man's thoughts. This could be valuable in the days to come." Black Wolf's eyes met Sarah's briefly, a glance heavy with unspoken meaning. "There is truth in this. Already she has helped us understand the Peace Commission's written words better than their own interpreters." The council's focus shifted as more warriors reported on the movements of both Lakota and army patrols. Sarah listened intently, her mind working on multiple levels. She understood now why Black Wolf had insisted she learn not just the Crow language, but their way of thinking, their respect for timing, their careful weighing of all factors before action. As the council continued, Sarah found her thoughts drawn to the silver locket at her throat. Inside lay a reminder of another world of political maneuvering and careful alliances. Perhaps her past had prepared her for this moment more than she'd realized. When the council ended, Black Wolf held her back with a subtle gesture. They waited as the others filed out until only White Shell Woman remained, tending the sacred fire. "There will be more such challenges," he said quietly. "Some will look for any sign of weakness in my leadership." Sarah met his gaze directly. "Because of me. Because change frightens those who cling to old ways." He touched the medicine bundle at his waist. "But the great wheel turns, and we must turn with it, or be broken." The old healer spoke from her place by the fire. "The spirits did not bring her to us without purpose. In times of great change, new medicine is needed." Sarah felt the weight of the moment settle around them like a winter blanket. Outside, the late autumn wind carried the sound of horses and children, of life continuing despite the threats gathering on the horizon. She thought of how far she had come from the drawing rooms of Boston, and how this place, these people, had become more real to her than all that had come before. "I will not be the cause of division in the tribe," she said firmly. Black Wolf's eyes softened, though his voice remained resolute. "Some divisions must come. Like the lightning splitting the dead tree, so new growth may emerge." He paused, then added more softly, "You are not a cause, but perhaps a sign of what we must become to survive." The chief's headdress cast long shadows in the firelight, each eagle feather a testament to wisdom earned through battle and sacrifice. Black Wolf had worn it only twice since Sarah's arrival, once during the harvest ceremony, and now on this night that would reshape the destiny of his people. The Great Council Lodge was packed beyond capacity, with warriors and elders pressed shoulder to shoulder. Even the young ones, usually kept away from such gatherings, peered through gaps in the lodge walls. Word had spread quickly after Black Wolf had called for a gathering of all adults in the tribe, something done only for matters of gravest importance. Sarah sat between White Shell Woman and Running Wolf's widow, her heart thundering against her ribs. Earlier that day, Black Wolf had come to her lodge, his face bearing the weight of mountains. "Tonight I break with tradition," he had said simply. "The spirits have shown me the path, though it is one no Crow chief has walked before." Now, watching him stand before the assembled tribe, Sarah understood what true leadership meant. It was not about wielding power, but about bearing the weight of change when change must come. Black Wolf raised his hands, and even the whispers died. He began in their language, his voice carrying the authority of not just his position, but of absolute conviction. Since the time of our grandfathers' grandfathers, the Crow people have survived by reading the signs the Great Spirit places before us. When buffalo grew scarce, we learned to hunt elk. When enemies grew strong, we learned to be stronger. When the white man's world pressed against our borders, we learned to trade instead of fight. He touched the medicine bundle at his waist, and Sarah noticed several elders lean forward slightly. They understood the significance of the gesture. My mother came to us from the Blackfeet, and some said it would weaken our blood. Instead, her wisdom made us stronger. Now the Great Spirit has sent us another sign. Sarah felt the atmosphere in the lodge shift as dozens of eyes turned toward her. She kept her spine straight, her gaze steady, just as she had in Boston's highest courts of society. But this was different. Here, she was not performing a role, but fighting for a future she had only just discovered she wanted. The woman known to you as Sarah, Black Wolf continued, has learned our ways with respect. She speaks our tongue, honors our customs, and carries her own medicine. He paused, letting his next words fall into the silence like stones into still water. I declare before all people and the spirits themselves, I will make her my woman, and she will sit beside me as queen of the Crow Nation. The lodge erupted. Young warriors leaped to their feet, elder women clapped hands over their mouths, and rising thunder's face darkened like a thundercloud. Through it all, Black Wolf stood, unmoved, as steady as the mountains themselves. White Shell Woman's gnarled hand found Sarah's and squeezed. Breathe, the old healer whispered. The storm must come before the sky can clear. Rising thunder's voice cut through the chaos. This is not our way. The chief's woman has always come from our own people. The spirits sent her. And to us, Black Wolf interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Or do you think it was chance that led our hunting party to her that day, that gave her the strength to learn our language, to respect our ways, that showed her heart to be more Crow than white, even before she knew it herself? He moved to stand beside Sarah, and she rose slowly to her feet. Together, they faced the tribe, he in his chief's regalia, she in the ceremonial dress she had earned the right to wear. I do not ask permission, Black Wolf said quietly, though his voice carried to every ear. I state what will be, but know this. I choose this path not just for myself, but for our people. The world changes like spring ice breaking. We must learn to change with it, or we will vanish like morning mist. Sarah felt a profound shift in the lodge's atmosphere. Black Wolf had not just declared his intentions, he had challenged his people to see beyond their traditions to a future where survival meant adaptation. She spoke then in clear Crow, her words carrying the weight of both worlds she now bridged. I stand before you not as a white woman seeking power, but as one who has found her true people. My heart beats with the drums of your ceremonies. My spirit dances with yours, under the stars. If you will have me, I will dedicate my life to the prosperity and protection of the Crow Nation. The silence that followed felt like the breath of the earth itself being held. Then, from her place by the fire, White Shell Woman began to sing the ancient blessing of unions. One by one, other voices joined, until the lodge rang with song, not of universal acceptance perhaps, but of acknowledgement that change, like the great wheel of the seasons, could not be held back. The treaty document lay unrolled on the council lodge floor, its crisp government paper in Congress against the softly tanned buffalo hide beneath. Sarah studied the dense legal text, her mind bridging the gulf between the flowery diplomatic language and the stark reality it represented. Captain James Morrison of the 2nd Cavalry waited with carefully masked impatience, his aide shifting uncomfortably beside him. The terms are quite generous, Morrison said, his eyes darting between Sarah and Black Wolf. The government is prepared to guarantee the safety of your people in exchange for just a small portion of your hunting grounds. Sarah understood what the captain couldn't, that Black Wolf had positioned her as translator not just for her language skills, but for her ability to read between the lines of white men's promises. A month had passed since their declaration, and already their partnership was evolving into something neither culture had quite seen before. Tell me, she said in English, her Boston accent returning smoothly. Does the small portion happen to include the valley where the buffalo winter? Morrison's slight flinch confirmed her suspicion. She turned to Black Wolf, switching to Crow. They want the winter hunting grounds. The guarantee of safety would mean nothing if our people starve. Black Wolf's face remained impassive, but she saw the approval in his eyes. Together, they had spent hours discussing the army's likely strategies, combining her knowledge of government tactics with his understanding of what the tribe needed to survive. Ask him, Black Wolf said in their tongue, if he thinks we cannot. Rid the seasons in the land we have hunted since before his grandfather's grandfather was born, Sarah translated, softening the words just enough to maintain diplomatic courtesy while keeping their steel core. Morrison's face reddened slightly. The government's patience is not endless, he said stiffly. Other tribes have already signed similar treaties. The Crow must decide if they will be friends or enemies, Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the cultured steel she'd learned in Boston's highest circles. Captain, let us speak plainly. You see before you not a band of savages to be herded onto convenient parcels, but a nation with its own laws, its own dignity, and its own understanding of the land you covet. She felt Black Wolf step close, his presence lending strength to her words. The medicine bundle at his waist seemed to pulse with the power of generations. The Crow people have always been friends to honest men, she continued, but friendship must flow both ways, like a river that nourishes both banks. Morrison studied her with new awareness. You're not what I expected, Miss Winchester, she supplied, seeing no reason to hide it. Formerly of Boston. And no, I expect I'm not, just as the Crow are not what your government expects. Black Wolf spoke then, and Sarah translated his words with pride. Tell your leaders that we will consider a treaty that respects both peoples. Bring us terms that do not ask us to choose between peace and survival, and you will find no better allies than the Crow. The captain rose, gathering his papers with military precision. I will convey your counter-proposal to my superiors. Though I must say, finding a white woman as the chief's translator and, he paused diplomatically, advisor was unexpected. The world changes, Captain, Sarah replied. Those who cannot adapt will be left behind, whether they wear blue coats or eagle feathers. After the soldiers departed, Black Wolf turned to her with a rare smile. You spoke with the sharpness of a hawk and the wisdom of an elder. I learned from a good teacher, she answered, touching the silver locket that now seemed to bridge her two worlds. My mother taught me to navigate Boston society's dangerous waters. You taught me to apply that skill to something worthwhile. Rising Thunder, who had watched the negotiations in thoughtful silence, approached them. Perhaps, he said slowly, the spirits knew what they were doing when they sent you to us. You see the white man's heart, but speak with a Crow soul. Black Wolf clasped his old friend's shoulder. The sun rises differently each day, yet it is always the sun. So too can wisdom wear many faces. That evening, as the council discussed the day's events, Sarah felt a subtle shift in the tribe's attitude. She had proved herself not just as Black Wolf's chosen woman, but as someone who could help the Crow navigate the treacherous waters ahead. White Shell Woman summed it up best as they shared a quiet moment by the fire. Some thought the chief was weakening our people by choosing you. Today, they began to see that he was actually strengthening us for the storms to come. Sarah touched the medicine wheel beaded onto her dress, her fingers finding the pattern that represented adaptation and renewal. In her heart, Boston society's elaborate dances were being replaced by new steps, equally complex but far more meaningful. This was her first test as Black Wolf's chosen partner, but she knew it would not be the last. The shared blanket wrapped around their shoulders as Sarah and Black Wolf sat at the edge of the camp, watching the moon rise over the distant mountains. These quiet moments had become precious to them, times when they could set aside the weight of leadership and simply be together, learning each other's hearts as autumn deepened toward winter. Tell me about your mother, Sarah said softly in Crow, her head resting against his shoulder. She had noticed how often he touched the medicine bundle when speaking of her, and how the tribe's older members still spoke her name with reverence. Black Wolf was silent for a long moment, his fingers absently tracing the patterns on the blanket, a wedding gift from White Shell Woman, who had woven stories of courage and harmony into its design. "She was born Sky Dancer of the Blackfeet," he began, his deep voice carrying the rhythm of a storyteller. "Given to our people as part of a peace treaty when she was younger than you are now. Many expected her to pine away like a flower without water, but she had iron in her soul." Sarah thought of her own mother, remembered in the locket against her chest, and the strength she had shown facing consumption with unfailing grace. "Strong women leave long shadows," she murmured. "Yes." Black Wolf shifted to look at her, his eyes reflecting starlight. "She taught me that leadership is not about being the strongest hunter or the fiercest warrior. It is about seeing the path others cannot yet see, and having the courage to walk it first," their fingers intertwined beneath the blanket. Sarah marveled at how natural it felt now, this closeness that once would have scandalized Boston society. Here, under the vast Montana sky, she had found a love that transcended the rigid boundaries of both their cultures. In Boston, she said, they measure a person's worth by their family name, their social connections, their adherence to proper behavior. I never felt more alone than at grand parties surrounded by hundreds of people. And now, his question held no judgment, only genuine interest in her heart's journey. Sarah smiled, touching the medicine wheel beaded onto her dress. "Now I understand. What my mother tried to tell me before she died. She said, 'Sarah, life is too precious to live by others' measurements.' I didn't understand then. I thought she was delirious from the fever. But here, with you, I finally comprehend her wisdom." Black Wolf reached into his medicine bundle and withdrew something small, wrapped in soft leather. "I have carried this since the day we found you," he said, carefully unwrapping it. "It was my mother's most treasured possession, a stone from the sacred mountains, carved with symbols of unity." The stone caught the moonlight, its polished surface revealing intricate designs that seemed to shift and flow. "She told me I would know when it was time to pass it on, that like her, I would find strength in unexpected places." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as he pressed the stone into her palm. In Boston, she had received countless expensive gifts from suitors, including Theodore's cold diamonds. But this small stone, warm from decades of being carried close to the heart, held more meaning than all of them combined. "I am honored," she whispered in Crow, using the most formal and sacred form of acceptance. "No," he said gently, "I am the one honored. You left your world behind, faced death in the wilderness, and instead of becoming bitter, you opened your heart to a new way of being. You remind me of her in that way." A lone wolf's howl echoed across the prairie, answered by its mate. Sarah had learned to hear such things differently now, not as threatening sounds in the darkness, but as reminders that life consisted of countless sacred partnerships. "Your mother," she said carefully, "do you think she would have approved of us?" Black Wolf's laugh was soft, but genuine. "She would have said that the Great Spirit has a sense of humor, sending me a white woman to teach me the true meaning of our ways." His face grew serious. "But yes, she would have seen what I see, a heart that beats in rhythm with our people's dreams." They sat together in comfortable silence as the moon climbed higher, the shared blanket holding their warmth. Sarah thought of the long journey that had brought her here, from Boston's glittering ballrooms to this quiet hillside where she had finally found not just love, but her true self. "Tomorrow brings new challenges," Black Wolf said finally. "The winter will test us all." Sarah straightened, every inch the partner of a chief. "Then we will face it as we have faced everything else, together, finding strength in the joining of our different medicines." Under the star-filled sky, they sealed this truth with a kiss that belonged to no culture but their own. The Boston newspaper crackled in Sarah's hands, its yellowed pages bearing a date from 3 months ago. A trader had brought it to the camp along with other goods, not knowing the weight of history contained in its faded print. Winchester scandal resolved, the headline proclaimed. Former Judge Edward Winchester vindicated, true conspirators revealed. Sarah sat in Whiteshell Woman's Lodge, her fingers trembling as she read further. The elderly healer watched her, faced with concern, understanding that whatever medicine this paper carried, it was powerful enough to drain the color from her cheeks. Theodore Carlton and Senator Harrison indicted for conspiracy, the article continued. Evidence shows elaborate plot to discredit Judge Winchester through false accusations against daughter. The truth, when it finally emerged, was both vindicating and bitter. Theodore's political ambitions had led him to forge an alliance with Senator Harrison, who had seen her father as a threat to his corruption of the Reconstruction funds. Sarah had been merely a convenient tool, her exile clearing the way for her father's removal from the bench and Harrison's consolidation of power. But they had miscalculated. Her father, though broken by her apparent betrayal, had not given up. He had spent months gathering evidence, following paper trails, until the truth could no longer be denied. "Your medicine is strong," Whiteshell Woman said softly in Crow, noting how Sarah's hand had gone to the locket at her throat. "Strong enough to outlast their lies." Before Sarah could respond, Black Wolf entered the lodge. One look at her face told him something had shifted in their world. Without a word, she handed him the newspaper, watching as Rising Thunder, who had followed him in, helped translate the English words. "Your name is cleared," Black Wolf said finally. "The path back to your world is open." Sarah stood, her legs steadier than she expected. Through the lodge's smoke hole, she could see children playing, women working hides, warriors returning from patrol, the daily life of the people who had become her true family. "That world tried to destroy me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But in doing so, it led me home." She touched the sacred stone that now hung alongside her mother's locket. "My path is here." Rising Thunder spoke up, surprising them all. "Yet your father suffered for their lies. Does he not deserve to know his daughter lives, that she has found honor among those his people call savages?" The question struck Sarah like a physical blow. She had thought of her father often, imagining his pain at her supposed betrayal. Now, knowing he had never lost faith in her, the weight of his suffering pressed against her heart. Black Wolf watched her intently, his hand resting on his medicine bundle. "When I found you," he said carefully, "you were running from shadows. Now those shadows have no power. What does your heart tell you?" Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the pull of two worlds. When she opened them again, she saw not conflict, but possibility. "My father taught me that justice without wisdom becomes cruelty," she said. Perhaps there is a way to honor both paths." "Speak your thought," Black Wolf encouraged, and she heard in his voice the same tone he used in council, that of a leader willing to consider new ways. "I could write to him," she said slowly, "not to return but to explain, to tell him of the liberty I've found here, of the wisdom and strength in Crow ways, to help him understand that his daughter didn't just survive exile, she found her true purpose." Whiteshell Woman nodded approvingly. "Good medicine often flows both ways, like a river bringing life to both banks." Black Wolf stepped forward, taking Sarah's hands in his. "Your father's heart will know peace, knowing his daughter lives with honor. And perhaps," he paused, his eyes holding a vision of the future, "perhaps your words will help build a bridge between our peoples. One truth at a time." Rising Thunder grunted his agreement. "The world changes. We must be wise enough to keep what is precious in our traditions while finding new paths forward." Sarah looked down at the newspaper once more, seeing it now not as a shadow of the past, but as an opportunity for the future. She had learned from Black Wolf that true leadership meant finding ways to turn obstacles into doorways. "I will write," she decided. "Not as Sarah Winchester of Boston, but as the woman I have become, a bridge between worlds, just as your mother was." She squeezed Black Wolf's hands. "And I will tell my father that though his justice cleared my name, it was here among the Crow that I found my true identity. The afternoon sun slanted through the smoke hole, illuminating the newspaper that had brought the past full circle. Sarah felt the weight of both her mother's locket and Black Wolf's sacred stone against her heart. No longer competing symbols, but complementary medicines for the path ahead. The wedding necklace caught the dawn light as White Shell Woman fastened it around Sarah's throat, the intricate beadwork telling the story of unions past and promises to come. Each bead had been contributed by a different woman of the tribe, a tradition stretching back generations, now adapted to include this unprecedented joining of two worlds. Even the oldest ceremonies can welcome new songs, the healer said, adjusting the necklace so it hung perfectly alongside Sarah's mother's locket. Your mother walks with you today, as do all the mothers before her. Sarah touched both pieces of jewelry, feeling the connection between her past and future. She wore a ceremonial dress that had taken the women of the tribe weeks to create, incorporating both traditional Crow designs and subtle elements that honored her Boston heritage. Delicate flowers beaded among the sacred geometric patterns, silk ribbons woven through the leather fringe. I'd never dreamed, Sarah said softly, that I would find myself here, about to be married in a ceremony more meaningful than anything Boston society could have offered. White Shell Woman's weathered hands smoothed Sarah's hair, weaving eagle, feathers and sweet grass into the braids. The Great Spirit has a way of leading us to the paths we were meant to walk, even when our eyes cannot see the trail. Outside, the camp stirred with preparation. This was no ordinary union. The marriage of a chief to a white woman who had earned her place among the people required something new, something that would honor both traditions while creating its own. Rising Thunder's wife appeared at the lodge. Entrance, it is time, she said, her voice warm with acceptance that had been hard-won over the months. The people are gathered. Sarah emerged into the crisp morning air to find the entire tribe assembled in a great circle. At its center stood Black Wolf, magnificent in his chief's regalia, the medicine bundle at his waist seeming to pulse with ancestral power. But it was his eyes that caught and held her, eyes that saw her completely, both who she had been and who she had become. The ceremony began with the traditional Crow blessing of unions, the drums beating in rhythm with the earth's heartbeat. But then came the first innovation. Sarah had asked permission to include elements of her own heritage, not from Boston society's rigid traditions, but from her mother's private teachings about what marriage truly meant. She spoke first in Crow, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed gathering. I come to this circle carrying the wisdom of my mothers before me to join it with the wisdom of your people. Then in English, she recited the words her mother had written in a letter before her death. Love is not about possession, but partnership, not about losing oneself, but finding oneself reflected in another's eyes. Black Wolf responded in both languages, his English carefully practiced for this moment. As the river joins the sea without losing its journey's story, so do we join our paths while honoring all that brought us here. White Shell Woman stepped forward with a new medicine bundle, one she had helped Sarah create over the past weeks. Inside were symbols of both worlds, the sacred stone from Black Wolf's mother, dried flowers from Boston pressed in Sarah's father's, book of law, an eagle feather given by Rising Thunder in acknowledgement of her warrior spirit, and a small beaded picture of a crow and a swan flying together. As they exchanged the traditional gifts, Black Wolf presenting her with his mother's ceremonial blanket, Sarah offering him a handcrafted leather book filled with the stories of both their peoples, the tribe began to sing. It was an ancient marriage song, but the words had been subtly changed to embrace this new kind of union. The final moment came as the sun reached its highest point. Black Wolf and Sarah faced each other within the circle, their hands clasped. He spoke the sacred words of the chief's lineage, naming her not just his wife, but his equal partner in leading their people. Sarah responded with the formal phrases she had learned, then added her own promise. Two rivers have joined to form one stronger current. Let our love guide our people through whatever waters lie ahead. As Black Wolf drew her into the ceremonial embrace, Sarah felt the presence of all who had led them to this moment. His mother, the peacemaker, her mother, the quiet rebel, the generations of both cultures who had lived and loved and somehow led to this unprecedented joining of hearts and worlds. The celebration that followed lasted until the stars emerged, with feasting and dancing that incorporated both Crow traditions and a few carefully chosen elements from Sarah's world. Young warriors performed their eagle dance, while Sarah taught a group of children a modified version of the Virginia reel, the two styles of movement somehow blending into something new and joyous. Later, as they sat together wrapped in his mother's blanket, Black Wolf touched the wedding necklace at Sarah's throat. "Today we have made new medicine," he said softly. "Our children will walk a path that knows no boundaries except those of honor and love." Sarah leaned into his strength, feeling truly at home in a way she had never known in Boston's grandest mansions. "We have shown them that love is stronger than tradition," she replied, "and that tradition is wise enough to embrace love." The broken peace pipe lay in 3 pieces on the council lodge floor, its shattered form, a stark testimony to the fragility of peace in changing times. Sarah knelt beside it, carefully gathering the fragments as the council's heated voices washed over her. The pipe had been a gift from the Northern Cheyenne, meant to seal an alliance against increasing settler encroachment. Now its breaking seemed prophetic. "The settlers push closer each day," Running Wolf reported, his young face taut with concern. "They have built 3 new homesteads in the valley where our people have always wintered, their fences cut across the buffalo trails." Black Wolf stood at the center of the lodge, his presence commanding even in this moment of crisis. "And the military?" he asked, though Sarah suspected he already knew the answer. "They claim they cannot stop independent settlers," Rising Thunder growled. "Yet their troops are quick enough to respond when our hunters approach the homesteads." Sarah placed the broken pipe pieces on a soft leather cloth, her mind working on multiple levels. In the month since their marriage ceremony, she had grown into her role as not just Black Wolf's wife, but as a true partner in leadership. Now, watching the worry lines deepen around her husband's eyes, she understood the weight of the decisions they faced. "The pipe can be mended," she said in Crow, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had learned from both White Shell Woman and her memories of her mother's subtle influence in Boston's political circles. "Perhaps alliances can be as well." All eyes turned to her. Some still held skepticism about a white woman's place in council, but none could deny her growing understanding of both worlds they now had to navigate. "Speak your thought," Black Wolf encouraged, and she heard the trust in his voice that gave her strength. "The settlers fear what they don't understand," she said, rising to stand beside her husband. "And our people fear losing everything that makes them Crow. But I have walked in both worlds now. Perhaps there is a path between." Rising Thunder touched the broken pipe. "Pretty words will not stop their fences or their plows." "No," Sarah agreed, "but understanding might. The settlers I knew in Boston feared the unknown wilderness and its people. They believed the stories they were told about savages and danger." She switched to English, letting the foreign words carry their own power. "Just as many here fear all white men are treaty breakers and thieves." Black Wolf's hand found the medicine bundle at his waist, their shared gesture now when facing difficult decisions. "What do you propose?" "Let me go to the settlements," Sarah said, her voice firm despite the murmur of protest that rose. "Not as a supplicant, but as the wife of the Crow Chief. Let them see that their stories of savages are as false as our fears that all settlers are enemies." "It is too dangerous," one of the elder women objected. "They will see only your white skin and try to rescue you from us." Sarah touched her wedding necklace, letting its strength flow into her. "They will see a Boston judge's daughter who chose to become Crow. Who better to help them understand the humanity they refuse to see in our people?" Black Wolf studied her face, reading the certainty there. Their month of marriage had taught them to communicate in glances, in the smallest shifts of expression. You would risk yourself to build this bridge? I risk nothing, she replied in Crow. My heart is here, but perhaps I can help others see what I have seen, that wisdom and honor know no color of skin. Rising thunder stirred uncomfortably. And if they try to hold you there? Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Then they will learn that a crow woman is not so easily held against her will. Her hand went to the knife at her belt, a wedding gift from Rising Thunder's own wife. The council erupted in discussion, but Sarah saw the subtle nod of approval from White Shell Woman. The old healer understood that new times required new medicines. Black Wolf raised his hand for silence. My wife speaks with wisdom earned in both worlds. We will consider her words. He switched to English, a language he had been practicing diligently. Together, we will find a path through these shadow lands. Later, as they prepared for sleep in their private lodge, Black Wolf touched the broken pipe Sarah had carefully wrapped. You carry 2 medicines now, he said softly. The strength of your Boston learning and the wisdom of our ways. Perhaps this is why the spirits brought you to us, not just for my heart's completion, but for our people's survival. Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart. When I fled Boston, I thought I had lost everything. Instead, I found a purpose greater than myself. She touched her mother's locket, now paired with her wedding necklace. 2 streams joining to form a stronger river. Outside, the night wind carried the sound of distant cattle, settlers' herds moving closer to crowlands. But Sarah felt no fear. Together, they would face whatever challenges came, finding strength in their unified medicine. The battle shield hung heavy in Sarah's hands as she urged her horse forward through the pre-dawn mist. The shield, an unexpected wedding gift from Rising Thunder, bore the symbol of protection, a crow and swan intertwined in flight. Behind her rode 20 of the tribe's warriors, while Black Wolf led another group to circle around the valleys. Far side, 3 days had passed since the settlers' ultimatum. Remove the entire tribe from the winter hunting grounds, or face forced removal by a coalition of homesteaders and hired guns. Sarah's diplomatic mission to their settlement had revealed a terrible truth. Among the homesteaders was Theodore Carlton, now a land speculation agent using his political connections to seize native territories. Your savage has apparently tamed you well, he had sneered upon recognizing her, his handsome face twisted with the same ambition that had orchestrated her exile. Though I must admit, finding you here simplifies matters. One word from you about being held captive, and we can eliminate this crow problem permanently. Sarah had felt a cold clarity in that moment, seeing the emptiness behind his cultured facade. The only captive here is you, Theodore, prisoner to your own greed. She had switched to perfect crow then, ordering her escorts to withdraw before violence erupted. Now, as the morning mist began to lift, Sarah positioned herself at the agreed-upon spot. White Shell Woman's words echoed in her memory. Sometimes, the strongest medicine is the battle not fought. The old healer had spent the night in ceremony, seeking guidance from the spirits. Her vision had led to this strategy, one that required perfect timing and absolute trust between husband and wife. The sound of horses and wagons carried through the dawn air, the settlers' forces approaching from the east. Sarah raised the shield, its surface catching the first rays of sunlight. Behind her, the warriors waited silently, their own shields creating a wall of reflected light. "Hold," she called softly in Crow. "Let them see what we want them to see." The settlers' group emerged from the mist, Theodore's voice carrying clearly as he directed hired guns into position. Sarah counted at least 30 armed men, their rifles glinting dully in the growing light. They pulled up short at the sight of her, clearly unprepared for this tableau. "Sarah Winchester," Theodore called out, his voice carrying that false concern she remembered so well. "Step aside. These savages have clearly bewitched you, but we can still save you from the only salvation needed here," she projected her voice, as she had learned in Boston's largest ballrooms, "is for you to see the truth before blood is shed needlessly." She spoke in English, letting her cultured accent remind them of who and what she was. Look around you, Theodore. Look carefully. As if on cue, Black Wolf's signal rang out, a perfect imitation of a crow's call. Suddenly, the morning sun crested. The valley's rim and the true scope of their position became clear to the settlers. The entire valley rim was lined with mounted warriors, their shields catching and reflecting the sun's rays like hundreds of brilliant stars. "Impossible," Theodore breathed. "Our scouts reported only a small hunting party." "Your scouts saw what we wanted them to see," Sarah replied. "Just as you see only what your greed allows." She raised her voice to address all the settlers. "I am Sarah Winchester, daughter of Judge Edward Winchester of Boston, and wife by choice to Black Wolf, chief of the Crow people. I stand here not as a captive, but as one who has seen the truth of both worlds." Black Wolf rode forward then, magnificent in his war regalia. "We do not seek war," he said in careful English, the words they had, practiced together carrying clearly across the valley. "But we will protect what is ours." The hired guns shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were completely surrounded. One of the older settlers, a man Sarah recognized as having shown her kindness during her diplomatic visit, spoke up. "Mr. Carlton, you said this would be a simple legal eviction. You said nothing about facing the entire Crow Nation. And you said nothing about using the daughter of one of Boston's most respected judges as a pawn," another settler added. "A judge who, I hear, has recently been restored to the bench." Sarah saw the moment Theodore's support began to crumble. The hired guns, realizing they faced not a small band of savages, but an organized force led by a woman whose connections could cause serious legal repercussions, began to pull back. "The winter hunting grounds have sustained both buffalo and crow since before any of us drew breath," Sarah called out. "There is room in this valley for all who come in peace. Those who come in war will find neither glory nor profit, only shame." The morning sun now illuminated the entire valley, revealing the futility of violence. As the settlers began to withdraw, Sarah felt Black Wolf's presence beside her, solid as the mountains themselves. "Your medicine is strong," he said softly. "In Crow, you have won a battle without drawing a single weapon." Sarah watched Theodore's retreating form, knowing this would not be the last challenge they faced. "We won it together," she replied, "with wisdom from both our worlds." The battle shield caught the full morning light, its intertwined crow and swan throwing a single unified shadow across the valley floor. The new treaty document lay unfurled on a table, placed deliberately between the settlers' wagons and the Crow encampment. Unlike the government papers with their dense legal terminology, this agreement was written in clear English with Crow translations beneath each paragraph. Sarah had spent days crafting the language, drawing on both her father's legal teachings and Black Wolf's understanding of sacred agreements. "It's unprecedented," Captain Morrison said, studying the document with a mixture of professional skepticism and grudging admiration. "A direct treaty between settlers and tribe, with provisions for shared access to the valley during different seasons." Sarah stood beside Black Wolf, their shoulders touching slightly, a gesture of unity visible to both communities. The morning's triumph had opened an unexpected door, and they were determined to make the most of it. "The buffalo migrate through the valley in winter," she explained. "During those months, the Crow people require full access for their traditional hunts. In summer, when the herds move north, the valley can support both grazing cattle and our people's gathering of medicines and materials." The older settler who had spoken up during the confrontation, Sarah had learned his name was Joseph Miller, nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. No point in running cattle here during the winter months anyway, too exposed to the storms." Theodore had disappeared with his hired guns, but his absence had actually simplified negotiations. The remaining settlers, mostly families, who had invested their life savings in the territory, proved more interested in finding ways to coexist than in fighting. Black Wolf spoke in English, his practice with Sarah enabling him to address the settlers directly. "My wife teaches that good fences make good neighbors, but better than fences is understanding where each belongs in the turning of seasons." Several settlers blinked in surprise at hearing their own proverb from the chief's lips. Sarah hid a small smile, remembering the hours they had spent discussing which concepts would bridge their cultures most effectively. Rising Thunder, who had positioned himself protectively near them, relaxed slightly as he watched the settlers' weapons remain holstered. His initial opposition to Sarah's role had transformed into a warrior's respect for different kinds of strength. "There's another advantage," Miller pointed out to his fellow settlers. "The Crow know this territory better than any of us. Their warning systems for weather and raids could mean the difference between survival and disaster for our homesteads." Sarah had carefully included this point in the treaty, knowing that mutual benefit would prove stronger than any moral arguments. "The Crow people have survived here for generations by reading the land's signs. We offer to share this knowledge in exchange for respect of our hunting rights and sacred places." The use of "we" was deliberate, and she saw from the settlers' expressions that they noted it. Here was a white woman, clearly educated and well-born, who had chosen to fully embrace the Crow way of life while retaining the ability to bridge both worlds. White Shell Woman, who had been watching silently, stepped forward to offer the pipe that had been carefully restored, its breaks now mended with bands of silver that made it stronger than before. "New ways come," she said in Crow, with Sarah translating, "but old wisdom shows us how to walk with them." The next hours were spent in detailed discussion of the treaty's terms. Sarah moved between groups, translating not just words but concepts, helping each side understand the other's perspectives and needs. Black Wolf's steady presence gave weight to every agreement, while Miller's practical questions helped clarify points that might have caused future confusion. By sunset, signatures and tribal marks filled the bottom of two identical documents, one for each community. As Sarah watched Miller and Black Wolf formally exchange copies, she felt a shift in the valley's very atmosphere. Something new was being born here, something that might offer a different path from the conflicts consuming other territories. "You have made medicine I did not think possible," Black Wolf said softly as they watched the settlers begin their peaceful withdrawal. "A bridge of words and understanding stronger than any war fence." Sarah leaned into his strength, feeling the weight of the day in her bones. "I learned from my husband that true leadership sees beyond the surface of things to the hearts beneath." Rising Thunder approached, his face thoughtful. "The young warriors are confused. They came ready for battle but found victory in peace. Then we must help them understand that there is more than one way to protect our people," Black Wolf replied. "The world changes. We must change with it or be broken by it." As the evening star appeared above the valley, Sarah touched the silver bands on the mended peace pipe. Like the breaks in the pipe, the divisions between peoples could become points of strength if joined with wisdom and care. It would not be easy. Theodore's disappearance promised future challenges, but they had shown that another way was possible. The valley lay peaceful around them, large enough to hold both traditions if approached with respect and understanding. Sarah thought of her father, imagining his pride in seeing his legal teachings used to protect rather than persecute. The next generation of both peoples would grow up knowing it was possible to maintain one's identity while learning from others, a lesson she herself had learned in the most unexpected way. The mixed culture cradle board rested against the lodge wall, its surface telling two stories at once. Traditional Crow symbols of protection and strength flowed into delicately beaded roses, Sarah's tribute to her mother's garden. White Shell Woman had overseen its creation, guiding the younger women in weaving together these different medicines for the child that grew beneath Sarah's heart. "The old ones say that children born of two worlds carry special power," the healer said, touching the cradleboard's intricate designs. "They see with eyes that know both sunrise and sunset." Sarah rested her hand on her swelling belly, feeling the flutter of new life. 6 months had passed since the treaty signing, and the valley had settled into a rhythm none had thought possible. Settler children now played at the edges of the camp, learning Crow words and games while their parents traded goods and knowledge with the tribe. I never dreamed, Sarah said softly, that my exile would lead to this, not just a home and love, but a future that might help heal the divisions between our peoples. Black Wolf ducked through the lodge entrance, his face brightening at the sight of her. In his hands he carried a letter, the latest in a continuing correspondence with her father. Judge Winchester had not only accepted his daughter's new life, but had become an unexpected ally, using his restored influence to protect the treaty and advocate for similar arrangements in other territories. "Your father sends blessings," Black Wolf said, settling beside her. "And news. The treaty model has drawn attention in Washington. Other tribes and settler groups are asking to learn more." Sarah leaned against his strength, remembering the frightened young woman who had fled Boston society's betrayal. That woman could never have imagined finding such profound purpose in the wilderness. "Rising Thunder's youngest started calling me aunt today," she said, smiling at the memory. "2 years ago, he wouldn't look me in the eye." "You have earned their respect," Black Wolf replied, his hand joining hers over their growing child. "Not by trying to be Crow, but by being true to both sides of your medicine." The afternoon sun cast the cradleboard's shadow across the lodge floor, a single shadow from its merged designs. Outside, they could hear Miller's wife teaching some tribal women her techniques for preserving vegetables, while a Crow elder demonstrated traditional methods of weatherproofing to interested settlers. "I worry sometimes," Sarah admitted, voicing a fear she shared only with her husband. "Theodore is still out there, and there will always be those who fear any bridging of our worlds." Black Wolf touched his medicine bundle, now containing items from both their traditions. "Fear is a poor guide for the future. Our child will walk in both worlds, showing others the strength that comes from understanding many ways." White Shell Woman nodded in agreement. "The old ceremonies teach us that life moves like a great wheel. What has been broken can be remade. Stronger. Look at the peace pipe. Its silver scars now make it more beautiful, more sacred." Sarah thought of her own scars, the pain of betrayal and exile that had led her to this unexpected destiny. Like the peace pipe, she had been broken, but remade stronger. Her mother's locket now hung beside medicines given by the tribe's grandmothers, each enhancing the power of the other. "The child stirs," she said, guiding Black Wolf's hand to feel their baby's movement, like the future itself awakening. He smiled, the expression private and warm. "Boy or girl, the child will carry the strength of both bloodlines. Your father's sense of justice, your mother's gentle wisdom, my mother's courage in bridging worlds, and its father's vision," Sarah added softly, "the ability to see beyond what is to what could be." White Shell Woman began to sing softly, a traditional blessing for unborn children, but with subtle changes in the words to embrace this unique situation. Sarah joined in, her voice carrying both Crow melodies and hints of the hymns her mother had loved. The cradleboard's shadow lengthened with the afternoon sun, reaching toward the future like a promise. Their child would face challenges, but would also inherit tools no previous generation had possessed. The ability to walk between worlds with confidence, to see diversity not as a weakness, but as medicine. Outside, the valley lay peaceful in the autumn light. Buffalo grazed alongside cattle in the distance, each finding their place in the changing landscape. Like the restored peace pipe, like Sarah's own journey from exile to enlightenment, the two communities were learning that healing was possible when approached with open hearts and willing spirits. "Our child will never know the taste of exile," Black Wolf said with quiet certainty. "They will know only the strength that comes from standing proudly in both worlds." Sarah touched the cradleboard's merged designs, feeling the truth of his words in her heart. Their love had done more than bridge two lives. It had opened a door for future generations to walk through, proud of all their medicines, all their stories, all their belonging. The story blanket spread across Sarah and Black Wolf's laps as they sat at the valley's edge, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of amber and rose. Their daughter, Grace White Swan, played nearby with children from both communities, her laughter carrying on the evening breeze. At 5 years old, she moved easily between both worlds, as comfortable in settler gatherings as she was in tribal ceremonies. The blanket's intricate design told their story in merged traditions, Boston-style embroidery flowing into Crow beadwork, each scene capturing a moment of their journey. Sarah traced the pattern showing her exile and rescue, remembering the desperate young woman she had been. The silver locket still hung at her throat, now accompanied by multiple strands of tribal honors and the wedding necklace that had started their shared path. "Look," Black Wolf said softly, pointing to where Miller's oldest son was teaching Grace to properly hold a bow, while Rising Thunder's daughter showed her the correct way to nock an arrow. "They create new medicines we could not have imagined." Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder, thinking of the letter recently arrived from her father. Judge Winchester planned to visit in the spring, his first journey west since her exile. He would find his daughter not only thrived, but had helped forge a new kind of community, one where differences were seen as strength rather than weakness. The story blanket's final panel remained unfinished, waiting for future chapters yet to unfold. Already, word of their success had spread. Other tribes and settler groups sought their counsel, wondering if their valley's peace could be replicated. Elsewhere, Theodore had tried once more to cause trouble, but found his political influence diminished by Judge Winchester's restored power and the growing support for the treaty system. "We have come far from that day you found me dying in the wilderness," Sarah mused, watching Grace demonstrate a crow dance step to her settler friends. "Though perhaps we were both lost then, in different ways." Black Wolf touched the medicine bundle that now contained pieces of both their histories. "The spirits led us to each other because we were ready to see with new eyes. Our daughter carries that vision forward." Grace came running up, her dark hair flowing behind her, her green eyes, so like her mother's, bright with excitement. She spoke in a fluid mix of English and Crow, as natural as breathing. "Father, Mother Joseph's family is bringing their new piano for the harvest gathering. Can I play the songs White Shell Woman taught me?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own piano lessons in Boston, now transformed into something new as White Shell Woman set traditional Crow songs to the instrument. "Of course, little one. Show them how beautiful two medicines can be when joined with respect." As their daughter ran back to her friends, Sarah and Black Wolf sat wrapped in the story blanket and the peace of the evening. The valley lay before them, neither fully white nor fully Crow, but something new and stronger, like the silver-mended peace pipe that had shown the way. "We are all stories in the end," Sarah said softly, touching the unfinished panel of their blanket. "But some stories show the way to better paths." Black Wolf drew her close as the first stars appeared above the mountains. "And some loves do more than heal two hearts," he replied. "They heal whole peoples, one understanding at a time." Together they watched their daughter dance between two worlds, her feet sure, her heart free, her future unlimited by the boundaries that had once seemed so insurmountable. In her and in the community they had built lay the truth that love could indeed build bridges stronger than any wall of fear or prejudice. The Montana sunset faded to dusk, and peace settled over the valley like a blessing.